And we are live. Good evening, Facebook. It is Cormac here from the Project 10 podcast series, doing something a little bit different with the episode here. Going to play out a short 5-minute clip from the latest episode in this series. The latest episode is the 4th episode. It is exploring what, why, and how we get offended. What is the individual reasons for being offended? What are the social pros and cons? And what are the evolutionary reasons to being offended? This short 5-minute clip is with Professor Stephanie Preston. She is an ecological neuroscientist, which is an incredibly impressive, confusing title. But she explores why and how we have evolved certain behaviors and tries to make sense of them over in her research lab in the University of Michigan. Other people that feature on the episode, if you haven't listened to it yet, are James Damore, the infamous Google memo writer who caused so much offense and outrage he lost his job. I speak to Tara Flynn, who's a writer, comedian, actress, about some of the comedic values, when and how to offend, and when you should step back and just stop complaining that people are far too easily offended. The Broadcasting Authority of Ireland are in there, clinical neuroscientists, psychology researchers, tons and tons of people exploring different perspectives on the whole idea of offence. So if you want to get the full episode, it is available now on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes as well. And if you do enjoy it, please rate, review it, share it around as much as possible. So we'll jump into this clip and episode. If you do like it, if you are listening, drop a like, a comment, say hi. And this is with Professor Stephanie Preston from the University of Michigan, explaining why and how we have evolved this feeling of being offended.
I think there's pretty good research in evolution and psychology on the extent to which cooperation requires revolting against cheaters, right? So the worst case scenario is I cooperate and you defect and you get away with all the goods. And I was trying to be nice and fair and kind, and I got the losing end of the stick because of it. So punishment, and even they call it third-party punishment in evolution and psychology, is thought to have evolved to prevent cheating during situations that require cooperation among individuals. So being offended is a way of emotionally punishing somebody for what you see as a violation to the contract of us collaborating and cooperating and existing in a collective together.
So there is some positive reasons why we should be offended. As you say, it's to protect, or it has been seen to protect, resources in the past.
Right, and to protect you in the current instance, let's say. So if someone's trying to take advantage of me and I'm offended, especially if I'm offended publicly, then I am providing a counterweight against their strategic manipulation of the situation, which then they have to take into account, and they might even anticipate how offended people are going to be if they take certain actions, which they end up integrating into their decision whether or not to do something offensive or self-serving.
So it kind of nearly teaches other people how to behave, or it teaches the social standards or the tribal standards of how to behave.
Right. It's like a socially acceptable analogy to what, with your own children or with, ancient people might have been like a slap in the face or, like a shunning or a beating or, like a public hanging or something. Now we can just be really offended and we can socially exclude the person. And it turns out that social exclusion is one of the most painful experiences most people go through. It even activates the same parts of your brain that process physical pain. And it's one of the things that people list as extreme stressors. So if offense, if causing other people to be offended by your behavior is also correlated with later being socially excluded, that makes it an actually very profound punishment and something to consider if you want to act in a self-serving way.
When you say it's linked to the same part of the brain as the physical pain that we may have experienced in the past, is that why a lot of people might find it a very visceral kind of tactile feeling, that it's not just it's very, very emotionally charged when people can get very offended?
Correct. Not only the person who's offended gets very emotional, because anger is like a righteous emotion that causes people to be highly focused on the situation and to be willing to take risks. So that means the person who's offended is highly emotional, but in a way that makes sure their feelings are known. And also the person who's on the receiving end of the offense is having this like emotional, strong feeling of guilt and regret and fear of what's going to come next.
Are certain people, do you know, more likely to be offended than others?
You have to assume So, I mean, that's consistent with all of our daily experience, right? Like we all know people who are more or less easily offended. My daughter yesterday specifically went out of her way to tell me a story knowing nothing about this interview about a kid in her class who's so easily offended, and it's very difficult to like work with the person because you don't even realize you're doing anything or you're not trying to do anything wrong and the person gets mad. And that's just like the report from a fourth grader. From the field, as it were. But I mean, I think that's consistent with our experience. But all of these behaviors you have to assume are normally distributed. So there's some range that's normal and typical that most people fall in. And then there's people who are highly prone to it, fewer people who are highly prone to it, and fewer people who are not very prone to it. So And I assume it differs a lot culturally, too.
Yeah, and then I don't know if there's any research to suggest this, but I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on it. If people are, let's say a group of people are more highly offended than the majority of, let's say, a tribe or a society, is there a chance that they could shape let's say the government's rules or policies that affect everyone else that may not necessarily be as upset or offended about this hypothetical situation, if that makes sense?
I think you have to be careful because I think that is similar to what's happening in America right now, where people are worried about like the thought police and the political correctness and things like that. And usually the people in power and the people who are usually on the winning end of these power struggles who are complaining that people are too easily offended. So the people who are subordinate or underprivileged or on the losing end of all of these social and economic dynamics are the ones usually complaining or offended, or minority individuals who are experiencing widespread oppression are the ones complaining. So I don't think the fact that people who are in power are thinking it's ridiculous is necessarily a good marker of what the actual situation is.
I suppose that would lead into then the fact that being offended these days and expressing outrage at situations would overall lead to hopefully a positive improvement in society.
It's hoped that everybody would benefit in that we bring the people who are oppressed up to more equal footing, but that's necessarily going to come at the expense of some exclusive privilege that people are aggressively fighting to maintain. So if it's more fair for everyone, people who are experiencing disproportionate benefits in the current system are the ones who are going to fight the most against this and call it complaining and being overly sensitive and things like that. It benefits them to do that.
Yeah, and obviously that goes down back to the evolutionary perspective of they would feel they're losing resources that they have acquired.
Correct. Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting when you mentioned social exclusion being one of the most reported horrible feelings to get. Why is that? And maybe what part of the brain does that attack when it makes you feel terrible?
Well, this kind of like hit in your stomach that you feel if you've been socially excluded. That's tied to anterior insula activity. And when it comes along with this like surprise and fear, like, oh, shoot, I just must have said something wrong. Everybody's getting mad at me. This kind of like, oh, shoot part of the experience is associated with this anterior cingulate cortex activity. So in combination, the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex represent this very visceral, embodied sense of, oh my God, I've just made a terrible mistake, right? And usually I believe that this neural system actually predisposes your motor system to make corrective action. So like one of the ways people say the system is if you just do a not ecological task, you're just pushing buttons and you're supposed to say red or blue or red or blue. And then one time you tap the wrong one and you go, oh shoot, I meant to say blue and I pushed red. And that's obviously going to activate the same system. But, you know, if you're socially excluded, this goes on for an extended period of time, not just in that one moment, but people can take corrective actions in the moment because your brain is primed actually to make immediate reparatory action situations like that. So you press the other buttons very quickly when you know you just made a mistake, or if you misspeak and it's immediately obvious on other people's faces, you might say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way, right? But in the long term, it's very painful and assumed evolutionarily very dangerous to be excluded from the group. So in a troop of monkeys, the individual who gets excluded can't join the protection of the group, and they are picked off by predators much more quickly. They're less able to share in food that's collectively resourced by the group. You know, their actual survival is at stake.
So that was a short clip from the latest episode, episode 4, Why Do We Get Offended? If you enjoyed it, if you liked it, please leave a comment or a like below. Let me know what you thought. If you want to hear the rest of the episode and you want to hear more from Professor Preston, you can find the episode on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify now as well, and wherever you get your podcast from there. It's on all the platforms. Other people that feature on the episode include James Damore, who offended so many people he lost his job at Google. He wrote a very controversial diversity document. I have Dr. Rothschild, who is an academic researcher and a psychological researcher. There is also clinical psychologists exploring hypersensitivity and are we just becoming overly sensitive? The Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, Tara Flynn, loads more are exploring various different aspects and perspectives as to why we get offended. So if you do want to check out that full episode, it is available right now. And if you enjoyed this short little clip and what we did here, let me know and we might do a few more of these as well. And also, if you want to get more information about the guests, links to their websites, their research, their academic papers, project10podcast.com. The episode show notes is up there and you can find out all the information to their links and to their websites and to their research. So thanks again for joining me here. I hope this was worthwhile of some sort, gave you a little taster into the latest episode. Go and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get it from, rate and review, and I will chat to you again if we do this live video. So have a good evening and I'll talk to you soon.